He's the member of the SPR, ASSAP, and the Ghost Club. And he values his contact with clients while respecting their own paranormal experiences. Tonight, they'll be talking about how members of ASSAP's NRPI apply a scientific approach in their investigations. And hopefully, it's my very dear wish that very soon the NRPI will be assigned more cases and will be sent out. And for that purpose, I've asked Mark, I hope you don't mind, to share with me as required the addresses of NRPI members. Right, well, thank you very much indeed for coming on tonight, and we're going to be doing this in two parts. I think, Andy, are you leading?
I'm in the background, and I'll be in the second part.
So Nick is part one, and then Andy is part two.
Yeah, Nick and Andy's part two. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. And
I said that without moving my lips. So that's good.
Would you like to share screen with us, or otherwise put yourself forwards, and we'll go for it.
Excellent. Okay, right. Well, thanks very much for that, CJ. Excellent introduction. It's taken about half of the introduction I'd sort of prepared anyway, but I think CJ's really covered it. But
can I say us?
What I'm just saying is that that at the moment, PRI UK is founded by myself and Andy Wilson, and it's an investigation and research group. We're based in South London, and my colleague and co-founder, who's actually at this very moment in time, he's actually dealing with technology. And so if you can hear any strange bumps or groans, it's probably nothing paranormal. It's just Andy in the background. So apologies for that.
Can I see us? Just check.
CJ?
Yeah,
can you see us all right?
Scott, you can see us. Patricia, can you see them? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. An anomalous hand. It's a dismembered body there, but anyway. So, as I say, we've decided that it would be easier if just one of us faced the camera, because as from experience has shown that we've really sort of been in a situation with two of us, it gets a little bit cramped. So Andy will be joining us, hopefully, if there are any questions at the end. And please feel free to ask any questions. We're really looking forward to that. So as CJ's explained, the webinar is really based on our thoughts regarding the state of paranormal research and from our own personal experiences. And I suppose what we had to ask is, what has ASSAP actually done for us? And in some ways, we're actually making the case for ASSAP, and that includes the NRPI, which CJ mentioned earlier. That's the National Register of Professional Investigators. And I suppose if you borrow that Monty Python, what have the Romans ever done for us? It's a bit of a kind of, what's ASSAP ever done for us? So anyway, just a bit of background, and I say CJ's done an excellent job there, but we both developed an interest in the paranormal when we were children. We both had experiences, and those obviously stayed with us until we actually reached adulthood, and things happened along the way. So Andy and I met up several years ago as members of the Ghost Club, and I think we developed quite a quick friendship. I think there was a common bond between us. We recognised how investigation should be undertaken, and I think really it led to a kind of scientific, rather than relying perhaps on mediums. We wanted to test things. We wanted to see actually how things were happening. So we were involved with investigations, and the Ghost Club do undertake investigations quite regularly, but and without, this isn't a criticism, I mean, they're very much a sort of arranged events, 20, 30 people. I mean, obviously the thing has to be financed. So it really wasn't sort of ticking the box. There were some smaller ones. We were getting referrals. We did I think a dentist in Chelmsford, and there was a pub to the west of London. So that was a smaller group and a little bit more scientific. As CJ mentioned, we are members of the SPR, and that's a fantastic source of information. And like the Ghost Club, it holds regular, interesting talks by leading figures and researchers from around the world. Of course, there are books. I mean, Steve Parsons last week is a fantastic example of a leading light in paranormal research. And of course, the SPR has its own library, and we have made use of that. So a plug there for the SPR. And of course, the other thing is that belonging to these groups gives you the opportunity for peer discussion, and it obviously leads to or fulfills the role of research. And through that, we have actually contributed to the Ghost Club Journal. We've also been featured, I think, in Paranormal Underground because of the little bit of research that we've been doing and some of the investigations that we've been involved with. And we also tied up with a magazine, which was The Next Truth, which is an up-and-coming science-based magazine. And it has links basically to the paranormal, but basically it is a scientific magazine, and such people as Nick Pope is actually featured on the front of that particular magazine, the Max Planck Institute, and other notables such as Dr. Michio Kaku and Dr. Zahir Hawass. So, you know, as I say, up and coming, and we've been, I suppose, honoured in some ways in being able to sort of publish some papers actually in that particular magazine. But although we were keen to want to expand our knowledge and research, it's fair to say that I think our goal was really to be more hands-on in having investigation and actually going out into the field. From our personal experience, I suppose it all started perhaps with some of the professional, and I use that term a little bit loosely. They are a little bit sort of circusy. I mean, they're very much thrill-seeking. You know, they are events. People are there to enjoy themselves, have a fantastic time. I suppose they fulfill some sort of role, but it wasn't really for us. You know, I think the fact that, you know, there had to be the obligatory medium, the demonologist, you know, the lights had to go out. We were in the dark holding hands. And a lot of it was also suggestion and not particularly scientific. I guess a lot of it actually went back to TV and people's expectations. And this idea that when you're actually sort of dealing with sort of spirits, that you have to be courteous to them. You know, something happens, you know, you're pleasing, you know, you have to please them, you have to thank them. And it doesn't really seem very sort of scientific in that particular aspect. So we wanted to base our investigations using sort of a rational scientific perspective. And we started looking around at other groups on the web and really what they were actually doing. Quite frankly, it was bewildering as the thrill-seeking professional ghost hunters, you know, they were just merely duplicating that. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, the other people that have spoken about this, I know Anne Winsper mentioned this last year at the Seriously Strange weekend, Steve Parsons at the joint Ghost Club and SPR workshop last year. More recently, Dylan Jones has talked about it on the ASSAP webinar. And so clearly there is a consensus that these sort of groups do nothing to add credibility. And I think that's really the key word, that the credibility to the serious study of paranormal phenomena. And it became clear that we weren't going to be in that mainstream. And I think, rightly or wrongly, but certainly from our perspective, that's how we saw it. That was the mainstream, and we didn't really want to be a part of it. So the idea of organising ourselves into something that resembled a paramilitary group, you know, with the shiny badges, the moody black and white photographs, the team holding ghost busting equipment, you know, like guns and everything else. The job titles, that just wasn't us. And certainly it wasn't a path that we wanted to follow. And I think if you looked at them perhaps on YouTube, the links to videos, scary moments, it was quite clear that all it was thrill seeking. And again, trying to provide some sort of expectation for either people that were paying to be involved with it or really just for themselves. And you know, it was just mirroring what was actually happening on TV and a lot of those programs. So it wasn't really all doom and gloom, because in trying to sort of establish ourselves and trying to find out something that was a little bit more what we were into, is that we discovered ASSAP. Now, it might seem a bit odd that, you know, we came into ASSAP And I'm not suggesting that it sort of ranks below the Ghost Club or the SPR. It's just that being members of those groups, we weren't really thinking of anything else. But when we looked into it, we found that there was actually a scientific-based research group. It has a public source of information, and one of the great names that we always talk about is Maurice Townsend. So if he's out there or gets to hear of this, thank you very much, Maurice. And of course, there was the backup. There's the Seriously Strange magazine, the weekend, the Seriously Strange weekend. And really what caught our eye was the training. And with the benefit at the end of it of being part of the NRPI. And I think that's really where we started to think, well, this is what we really want to be, and this is where we need to be a part of. So we'd actually found a credible association that actually, when you look at it, is of equal standing with the Ghost Club and the SPR, and that was actually promoting, and I think that's the important thing, was actually promoting good practice, advice, and clearly leading the way with the concept of the NRPI. This was what we were just looking for, and obviously it ticked the boxes. So it might seem strange that we're sort of trying to promote ASSAP and the NRPI to its members, but we think that it leads into a lot of ways into how you can actually form yourself into, I suppose, a respected group. And when you're working from the grassroots level, without wanting to sound sort of sanctimonious, pompous, whatever, and I certainly am pompous, but putting that aside, it meant that you had something that was backing you, or you could be a part of something which was serious and credible. It comes back to that word, really, credible. So I think as an association, we certainly wanted to become part of NRPI. So we have been through the training, and Andy and ourselves actually have become trainers as well. We trained with Norrie and Mark Davey in just before lockdown this year. So we were great. That was, again, fantastic, big part of that as well. But it's not only that, it's the fact that that the credibility is that we can actually use that and become affiliated, as we are as a group, to ASSAP as well. And I think that's important, because that is something which the other groups, I'll talk about other groups, principally the Ghost Club and the SBR, don't really offer. So we are in ourselves attaching ourselves to a credible group, and that reflects on us, and we can use that. And I think that's so important. Now, I'm not suggesting that it sort of generates interest in the group, because we are getting quite a lot of interest, but it does say to people that we are a credible and, I think, a serious group. And I think in some ways it helps us being able to pick and choose some of the cases that are actually presented to us. So I'm not saying that we're being elitist. I don't think that's being elitist. It just means that all we're trying to do is to fulfill the role and trying to act in a scientific and ethical way. We try to be science-based, and I suppose for anybody that's been through the NRPI training, that's understood. But really what it means is that you're trying to establish exactly what it is happening, and using a sort of a kind of rational approach before just leaping into this idea that whatever is actually happening is actually paranormal. So apart from that, here we go again, apart from that, what else does it actually provide? And I think the thing is, we are sort of liaising with the client and embracing them. We're obtaining their consent, we're observing their privacy. And I think really importantly, particularly in this day and this age, where so much material is being stored electronically, that we abide by data protection requirements. Anyway, moving on, what is actually happening at the moment? We're all obviously affected by the COVID situation. But one of the things that we've noticed, and it's a bit weird, is that we seem to have had far more referrals. We're not exactly inundated or a flood, but we're getting an awful lot of referrals since the COVID situation and the lockdown. We have had some other inquiries. We've had a social club in Lightwater experienced some strange stuff. They came to us, and we've also been approached by the Sun online for opinion on photographs. So it's not all of that, but it does seem to have generated an awful lot of anxiety. But the other disturbing factor is that a lot of the people that are coming to us are saying that, how much do you charge? What are your fees? And we're saying, well, we don't actually charge anything. We're doing this because we're interested and we'd like to help people out. So in some ways, that is a two-way process. But on the other hand, a lot of these people are actually talking about people, for example, a grandmother in Hull who was charged £100 for a group to go out to her. She actually admitted that she went without gas and electricity. Not a good case. London, £80 is the sort of the going rate. We've also had one situation that we were involved with, one event that we were involved in Essex, and they were being asked to charge, or they were being asked to pay £150. The other thing is that what we're also finding, and I think this is becoming more and more common, is that people are coming to you with these preconceived ideas that are being generated by these other groups. So, for example, they are talking about portals and they're talking about demons. I mean, the number of people that actually say, here's a photograph, this is where the portal is, this is where the demons are coming through, this is where the spirits are coming through to us. They're needing for their homes to be cleansed. And again, it seems to be leading into groups or people that are setting themselves up in business who will say that they can remotely remove spirits. They're not even visiting the property, and the trouble is that they're also saying remotely from the comfort of their living rooms, presumably, that they know that the property is actually haunted and there are demons, and it scares people, quite frankly. I mean, if you're being told there's a demon in your house by somebody that should know, then it does sort of worry you, I think. Smudging is the latest thing. Everybody wants to have their house smudged if they think they've got a demon.
Charge £100 for smudging.
Yeah, I mean, the charging rates for that do vary, but the point is that, again, it indicates that this is a trend and can only go back to TV programs. I mean, as far as I'm aware, this is just a sort of North American indigenous population type of cleansing or way of dealing with particular problems, including spirits. Interestingly enough, the church also seems to be more involved. We've had at least 2 cases recently where Church of England has been contacted, Roman Catholic as well, and they are blessing the properties. And I think that that's something which seems to be on the increase. So there seems to be more involvement. It hasn't actually gone to exorcism because I don't think the case is merited it anyway. But again, it does actually seem that the church is taking attention, and in some ways people are aware of that, and it feeds our anxieties. We are getting these cases, as I mentioned, the remote situation where you have mediums that they are going into people's houses and telling them straight away that, yes, I can sense there's a demon, there's a spirit, and it doesn't help their client effectively. It is really causing a lot of anxiety. So I think the thing is that if you're adopting a rational approach and trying to bring it down with people, then I think that at least you're helping them and you can get people through it, whether the place is actually haunted or not. And I think this is a lot to do with it. There is a lot of psychology involved. Social media is certainly fueling it. And more often than not, it's a case that odd things happen and people will just say, my house is haunted. They have a situation. I felt something moving through the room or something like that. And people will just support that. When I say people, I'm talking about some of the less scrupulous groups, the less credible people, and they're just basically saying, oh, well, that will be the demon. The other sort of disturbing factor, and again, this could be linked to the COVID situation, is that we've certainly had 3 cases recently which were on the face of it, low-level poltergeist activity. And when we dug down a little bit deeper, there was a situation where it was actually, it was probably or possibly linked to domestic violence. So again, people are looking for, I suppose, social situations and trying to link it to some sort of paranormal activity. And that is, I think, particularly worrying. One of those, actually, as it was, turned out to be fraudulent, and we'll actually go through that a little bit later on in slightly more sort of humorous in way. The other thing is that the groups have little consideration for ethical investigations. They're not looking perhaps for medical causes to some of the discomfort that people are experiencing. The person I mentioned earlier, the grandmother who paid £100 to a bogus team in Hull, actually was suffering from a very serious condition, breathing condition, and was complaining of having sort of situations at night where she was having or felt that there were demons on her chest. And again, that was promoted by the group that she first contacted. And as I say, our first immediate reaction was to say, well, look, you need to consult with your doctor. I mean, that's the first port of call, and then perhaps we'll consider actually any other action that may be required afterwards. So it brings us back to the question of credibility. And I think when people start talking about the groups, the bogus groups that are out there, and I'm, perhaps being unfair by saying bogus, but I think we do tend to regard them as being bogus. The fact is that they do actually lack credibility. And the reason they're lacking credibility is because they're just promoting fear. So this is where we sort of came in. We obviously do our own investigations. As I say, we go along the NRPI route. And as I say, we do use that association with ASSAP because I think it does actually provide us with credibility. The other thing is that by being part of ASSAP is that we do get referrals that we just cannot basically follow through. We had one recently in Exeter, which unfortunately we're based in South London, so and we had a lot going on at the time, so we really couldn't do anything. So we were able to contact Mark Davey and say, look, can you perhaps put this person in touch with a local group? And again, that's something that CJ has just sort of mentioned. This is sort of network of credible people that will actually go out there. And of course, it's reassuring that we can actually then say to these people, look, we can't come to Exeter. However, there is a group down your way, and I think they may have been Bristol based, that is prepared to take this up. And it's good from our point of view because we're not putting them in the hands of these sort of groups that you really don't want to be involved or involved with at all. So anyway, I think the thing is that we do look at how things are actually progressing. Now, I think that in terms of the history of paranormal research, so I'm sort of moving on a little bit here, having sort of talked about our background and obviously our role. Is to look back at the past, and I think to say, and as CJ mentioned, my interest certainly came from religion, because one of the things I've actually noticed is that very much the supernatural is very much part of the human condition. It's been part of our culture in so many ways, as I say, and it does actually form the basis of a lot of religious belief, or certainly is embraced by religion. But of course, the big thing happened in the mid-19th century, obviously with the development of mediumship, of the Fox sisters as being I suppose the base point there, and it's grown into a wider field of interest. But and I'm not going to really dwell on that because I think again that's been talked about. I know CJ did a great talk the other week about sort of the history of paranormal research, but the point is science is evolving, And again, that comes back to the point that if you're looking to find some sort of reason for what's actually happening, and I think that's really what sort of motivates us, is that you've got to look for some sort of scientific reason. And again, it comes back to ASSAP and their ethos. So how far have we actually come? I mean, we live in a digital age. We're about to probably enter an age where artificial intelligence is going to play a greater part than it does already. And our investigation's actually keeping up with it. So again, there is another incentive to be involved with a group like ASSAP. You become cutting edge. And I think, again, that's what we find so interesting and so important to us. You look around, I mean, the social media, it is completely and utterly overloaded. If you look on YouTube, if you just do searches on the internet, the groups out there, but this is all being spawned by TV, in our opinion, rightly or wrongly. And I think the thing is that there are people out there that do actually want a world which is haunted by demons, visitations by UFOs, which is fantastic. But the trouble is it goes beyond sort of the rational. And the thing is that nobody's actually proving that these things are actually happening. They're just being presented as fact. So anyway, as far as our situation is, and I think that you look at it, we're involved with ASSAP at the SPR. Again, a fantastic research organization, but the thing is, it's not hands-on. And I think this is another thing, coming back to where we are with ASSAP, that you do feel as though we are, Andy, myself and the group, we are hands-on. We are going out to people. We are sort of trying to answer their questions, investigate, and the paranormal hand, the anomalous hand appears again. And I think that's one of the really important things of ASSAP, that it is actually taking on the grassroots people who are actually out there investigating. I mean, the SPR is quite a sort of a highbrow organisation. We're not highbrow people ourselves. That's one of the other things I'd want to, we're just interested amateurs, really. But the SPR is actually, if you look at I think I've got the figures here. Let's have a look. Yeah, SPR presidents, vice presidents, all 6 are doctors or professors. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that I could engage in a meaningful scientific conversation with these people, but all I can offer is actually going out and talking to people that are approaching us, PRI UK, and telling us about their stories, and we're looking at them and we're documenting it, and we will share that information, obviously subject to data protection. Anyway, as I say, we are amateurs, we're interested. We don't really come from a scientific background, but I don't think that should really hold us back. And I think, again, that is an important factor as far as we're concerned. I think if you looked at some of the establishments, and a lot of people that have perhaps been talking recently, if you look at their qualifications, you perhaps think, wow, I really, I'm out of my league here. Perhaps you could add your own comments to that, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just some bloke doing something that I'm interested in and trying to find some answers, and who knows, perhaps one day that would actually happen. Okay, so what do we get out of ASSAP? And I think it really comes back to that point that I was actually making about the Monty Python thing, about what have the Romans ever done for us. Well, what ASSAP has actually done for us is, one, it's embraced us because we are, as a group, affiliated. We've got the NRPI badge, or whatever you want to call it, the card that we can present to people. And some people do belittle it. I mean, there have been some people that sort of look into it and say, oh, well, you're like chiropodists have got these sort of things, and, other people, other groups, and make light of it. But actually, that's quite important to us. And I think the thing is, it's perhaps important when we're actually talking to people and say, look, we are ethical and we are part of a credible group. So, I think that's a fantastic thing. So ASSAP is entering its 40th year. And I think, again, that is itself testament to what a good job it's actually doing, and certainly why we want to be part of it. And I think that sort of more or less sums up what we were sort of going to be doing as a kind of part one. What I would also add is that if you read the Seriously Strange magazine, the summer edition, there's an article by Mark Davey. So I'm not sure if he's logged in at the moment, but if you are, hi Mark. And his article said about where have all the serious investigators gone? Well, obviously it's looking at it from the same perspective as us, but hopefully what it also does is, and what we're doing here, is actually saying, well, actually, Mark, we are here, we are affiliated to ASSAP, and we are spreading the word as much as we can. We're trying to get as many people on board as we possibly can as well. So if that is tinged with a little bit of, oh dear, where is everybody these days? Hopefully you'll find that the ranks are actually swelling. We're going to sort of have a bit of a kind of humorous diversion, if you can stand this. We had a recent case, low level, again, podcast activity. Fortunately, it was local, and we weren't able to spend too much time in sort of involving ourselves with it. But we became a little bit suspicious about the people. There was a lot of activity that was sort of going on. Pools of water appearing in a hall. There was a particular photograph that apparently sort of self-immolated, if that's the right term. It's certainly burned, charred, and it was a child, so there was a little bit of emotional attachment to that.
Earrings.
Oh yes, earrings were disappearing and reappearing, all sorts of strange things. A £20 note appeared and disappeared, and anyway. But what was actually, it was getting a little bit too good to be true, and whereas we thought this could perhaps be our Enfield poltergeist case, I think within a week we'd already decided that it wasn't ringing true. And eventually I had a phone call on, I think it was a Saturday night, to say, oh, things are really kicking off. You've got to come over as soon as possible, which of course we did. I think it was on the Sunday, because we've actually got something on camera. And wow, you know, this is great. This is the book. This is fantastic. Fine until they actually showed us on their large screen TV. There was 5 minutes of footage, and I think I've condensed it down to about a minute. But it is quite amusing, and what it really leads to, I suppose, in an ironic way, is the string theory and how it actually attaches to the paranormal. And I think that's a bit of a big clue. But anyway, hopefully you'll find this is funny. I mean, we do try and sort of deal with all of this with a bit of a sense of humor. I think somebody suggested it was a sort of a sixth sense of humor, right? Anyway, those are the sort of jokes we have to put up with. But anyway, we're about to play it. So if you just put up with it for about a minute, and hopefully it will cause a little bit of amusement. But anyway, here it is. As I say, hope you found that amusing. I mean, it's perhaps not very ethical, I don't know, but the thing was that we felt that we were being sort of treated as the patsies there. So I suppose in some ways we have an opportunity to sort of not exactly get our own back, but we sat there watching this, Andy and me. We didn't say anything, but we sort of did sort of end the investigation after that and say, well, thank you very much. And they did come back to us and say that everything had calmed down, and the poltergeist or the spirits, demons, whatever it was that was out there had suddenly stopped. And I think they knew that we'd rumbled them. So anyway, right, okay. So if you don't mind, and if we've still got plenty of time, we're still going to do a sort of a part 2, because having sort of, I wouldn't say bored you, but put over a case for ASSAP, NRPI. What we thought we'd do is actually share one of the investigations that we did, and this was at Tilbury Fort. And Tilbury Fort is located in Essex, for those of you that don't know. It's actually an English heritage site. It's one of the best preserved Tudor forts along the Thames, and as I say, the original fort probably predates the Tudors, but it was Henry VIII that decided that he wanted to fortify the Thames, or fortify the Thames to prevent any attacks from, I think it was probably the Spanish and maybe the Dutch later on. But still, it's located on the north bank of the River Thames. It's approximately 30 miles to the east of central London by river, and approximately 11 miles to the west of Canvey Island and the Thames estuary. At that particular point, the Thames is about 730 metres, so it's not particularly wide, but just up the river towards toward London, it is actually Tilbury Docks, and it is a deep water port, so large ships can actually navigate that particular part of the Thames. And it is quite something to see, you know, very close quarters, you know, container lorries up and down the river. You do really feel as they could sort of reach out and touch them. Now, our association with Tilbury Fort goes back to an investigation that we did with the Ghost Club, and we picked up some really good anomalous phenomena there, EVPs, and there was also an anomalous rap, which was the subject of the Ghost Club article, which I mentioned earlier, analysed, and it did sort of fit a particular profile in terms of the waveform that the noise produced. So we kept that sort of relationship running, and we kept in touch with the site manager, who did come back to us at one particular point and said, look, we're actually getting more and more activity. And I think the thing is that all staff at that particular location, and as you see from the picture, it's quite sort of spread out, but there are some clusters of buildings around the outside. But a lot of the activity seems to centre on what is the gatehouse, and I can't really point to it, but if you can see where the River Thames is on the right-hand side, there is a sort of a whitish building, which is the gatehouse, and just inside the gatehouse, the anomalous hand reappears. There's another building which is actually used as the shop, that's where you pay, and there is actually a chapel above it, and that's where the activity was sort of being reported. And the activity was one, it was book flying off the shelf. That was actually a bit weird because it happened on Armistice Day, so November the 11th, and that's, I think, 2018. And what was interesting about that particular book was it's a poem. It's a book of poems about the First World War. So again, there was sort of a link, there was a connection, which seemed quite interesting. So apart from the book flying off the shelf, there were reports of mumbling voices, whistling, which again is another common feature of the fort. There seems to be an awful lot of whistling going on, and footsteps from above. So if you can imagine this, I guess that particular building is probably Jacobean, or from the Jacobean period. So we're talking about early 17th through to late 1700s. It's a stone building, and obviously of the floor above where the chapel is actually located. And most of the events that were actually being reported were actually soon after the shop had opened. And the shop opens to the public, that is, at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. It's only opened a few days a week. It's not open every day of the week. So if you're thinking of taking a journey, and it really is worth actually visiting, fantastic place to visit. So it is English heritage. So if you're members, you know, it's going to be free for you to get in, but I think they're reasonably priced. But anyway, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. But on this particular morning, when the book flew off the shelf, it was the Sunday morning, the 11th. So we've got one or two pictures to give you some idea of what the area of investigation, because I say it's quite vast, the fort, so it's almost impossible to take in the whole. We were just looking at these particular reports in that particular building. So if you look at there's a picture I think that we've got of the bookcase, and there it is, the books. And I think if you look at the mugs, that's the one with the poppies on, just to the, as we're looking at the right, that is where the book of poems was. And that, as you can see, standing upright, and that apparently flew off the shelf quite spectacularly, and obviously alarmed the staff. There's a further picture that is actually Andy with both of his arms attached, talking to, actually, I won't give his name, but he's actually the site manager. He's the chap that we were dealing with, and he's just sort of talking through. But I'm not going to give too much away. Well, I'm going to give quite a lot away, actually, because where he's actually leaning, and this is quite interesting, is a refrigerated unit and also a cooler. And perhaps a little bit more about that later, but perhaps giving a bit too much away. So, as I mentioned, the footsteps from above were coming from the chapel. So I think we're just about to see a picture of the chapel, and that is a chapel. And again, you'll notice that obviously there's a lot of wood, obviously the pews and the floorboards. Now, bearing in mind that this is quite an old building, there's no ceiling in the shop below. It's just the floorboards above. So again, you know, what we're looking at and what we're trying to establish is what could possibly have made those footstep sounds. The other thing about the sounds that were being heard, the whispering, and I think the whistling as well. There's we did actually take a picture, and there was a number of vents actually in the shop, so presumably they were added at a later stage to provide adequate ventilation for the particular shop. And unfortunately, the next picture that we've got is a very rough sketch of a floor plan. I think that's probably one that Mark Davey would not be proud of, but anyway, we wanted to sort of just gauge the layout. There are other photographs, but we're not including them. So I think the thing is, and this is the rational side of the ASSAP type or the NRPI type investigation, is to actually consider what is actually happening and to formulate some sort of hypothesis. So in other words, what is actually basically happening? You know, what is it that you're wanting to investigate, and really what are you going to get out of it? So I'm afraid that, being the skeptics that we are, and although we do believe that there is sort of unexplained phenomena out there, is that the book probably fell off the shelf due to natural causes. There was also the mumbling of voices and whistling travel from outside of the fort. So again, we wanted to investigate that. Was it the result of wind rushing through sash windows? Because they were sash windows, obviously in keeping with the character of the building, and the vents that we've seen. And there were other sort of ventilation pipes as well. I think there was some air conditioning. And obviously to consider the expansion and contraction of the floorboards created the sound of the footsteps. And I think that's important, because when you consider that a lot of the activity was being reported very soon after the shop was being opened, obviously for the public, and that was going to be at 10 o'clock, it would be at a time of day when there would be, I guess, a lot of thermal differential, you know, particularly that time of the year when you're in sort of November, and, you know, the sun suddenly comes up and it gets a lot warmer. And that was obviously what we were thinking. But I think with any investigation, you've got to also consider your own limitations. And unfortunately, one of ours is money. We don't really have the money to sort of buy expensive equipment. A great talk last week, Steve Parsons, about acoustics. And I think the thing is that obviously he was saying himself that if you really want to buy some decent equipment, you're talking thousands, tens of thousands of pounds. And of course, one of the things that sort of did intrigue us was the idea that there could be some sort of contamination from infrasound. Because obviously, and as I mentioned, that the Thames is very sort of narrow at that particular point, but you've got large ships up and down the river, container ships. You know, we're not talking about sort of small sailing dinghies. We're talking about huge container ships, and it would have been great if we could have actually perhaps been able to measure some of the sound that was actually being generated by them. I think the other thing is that, unfortunately, because of constraints, time constraints, the event, and particularly the book flying off the shelf on the 11th of November, we weren't able to do an investigation until February. So there could have been contamination of evidence. Certainly the two people that we were dealing with, the site manager and one of the other employees, who's actually one of the historians at the site as well, you know, they're obviously talking about what actually happened. And one of the things that we did actually find was that there was a sort of slight discrepancy in how far the book that we showed actually fell forward, and it was quite a significant difference.
About meter and a half.
Yes, I mean we're talking sort of meter, 2 meters, you know, difference, which in the scheme of things is quite, you know, significant. The other thing was things like the footsteps. Well, how many footsteps did you hear? Oh, well, it was 2 or 3, and then somebody else would actually say, "Oh, it was across the whole floor." You know, so there was obviously some sort of conflict in the information that we would be given. Now, that isn't to say that we don't trust these people. I mean, I think you've got to be careful. I mean, you've always got to judge the people that you're dealing with, but these two guys, I don't think there's any doubt that they are respectable and trustworthy, and you know, that's how they remember things being. But unfortunately, so the conflict that in the information they were providing did indicate that there's not so much embellishment, but perhaps things have changed over the course of time. The other thing is suggestion. Certainly, as far as all the staff that we've ever talked to, they've all experienced things which they think indicate that the fort is haunted. Whether it is or not, as I say, on this particular time, we didn't actually establish whether it was or not. We didn't see anything actually happen or record anything which seemed anomalous. But of course, the thing is, that's at the background of your mind. You're always going to be thinking that, you know, things are going to happen. And the strangest things that do, you know, the staff will actually be looking at it and say, well, actually, it was the ghost. You know, this is what's actually happened. Again, I'm not wanting to cast any doubts on their character, but at the back of our minds, we are aware that the fort has been used for ghost walks, and it would perhaps be a pretty good selling point to say, you know, that other groups have investigated, they've found this, that, and the other, and indicated that the fort is actually haunted. But as I say, I think that the biggest drawback was that we weren't able to sort of witness anything ourselves, and the claimed events. So we did actually set up a sort of a limited sort of, because we only had a few hours to actually do this, a sort of a test program to see what we could actually do. Certainly, tipping the book forward, as I say, from that particular cabinet, if you notice the way it was actually standing sort of upright, it wouldn't take an awful lot to actually make it tip forward anyway. Certainly, it would only fall straight forward onto the floor. It wasn't reaching anything like 2 meters. So again, did that actually suggest that there was some sort of anomalous force or something that was actually happening? But certainly, if you took the lowest of the sort of the projections, 1 meter, then it would suggest that it just actually fell off the shelf. So that was what we were trying to do there. We were trying to sort of replicate the distance. The voices and the whistling, again, we weren't sort of particularly successful with that, because certainly if you're outside and and you were shouting, that the voices weren't carrying to the level that was actually being reported. But then the trouble is that, you know, weather conditions could have been different. I mean, we don't know on that particular day that the person heard that, you know, which way the wind was blowing. Because one of the things that you will notice is if you actually stand on the banks of the Thames at that particular point, you can actually hear voices the other side of the river. I mean, that's Gravesend, you know, to, what was that, 273 meters. So, you know, and it wouldn't take much really for the wind to actually sort of carry a voice. But again, it was just a case of trying to test it, and we couldn't find anything. The footsteps, again, if you walked across the floor, it certainly was audible from down below. So it might sound a bit confused and a bit convoluted, but in looking at this, we certainly didn't see anything which actually sort of supported the actual claims that were actually being sort of made. We were aware that there were sort of discrepancies in the information that was being provided, but we were also aware of things like the ultrasound effect that the ships could have in terms of perhaps anomalous sounds. I'm sure that you would be hearing something consciously or unconsciously. And of course, the other thing that we were very aware of, and just going back to that picture of Andy and the site manager, with the refrigeration units, because if you noticed, they're actually standing on floorboards, and that's basically it. And certainly when the refrigerator switched itself on, there was definitely a rumbling. And bearing in mind the sort of the precarious nature of the book, I think you'd have to draw the conclusion that it just fell off the shelf because the refrigerator unit switched on. Again,
cold spot.
Yeah, and I think the other thing was that there was talk of cold spots as well. I think if you perhaps heard Andy mention, there were talks of cold spots, but still, I think the thing is that you'd have to point to the refrigeration units, and particularly when you think that the shop had only just been opened, and presumably they'd switched on the heating in the shop, and the refrigerator units would then kick in because of the rising air temperature. So inconclusive, but I hope it sort of gives some sort of indication of the thinking process. I say we're not looking for accolades, because probably a lot of people out thinking, what are they, idiots? Because if we'd been there, we'd have done such and such. But still, I think it ties in with this idea that what we're trying to do is sort of a rational explanation, and we're looking for a rational explanation for rushing in and saying, oh, your house is haunted, you've got ghosts, you've got spirits, you've got demons all over the place, you know, and I think that's the process, and hopefully what Mark Davey mentioned about where all the serious investigators gone. So hopefully we're actually included in that group of serious investigators. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it hasn't been sort of too tortuous. But anyway, I'm going to hand you back to CJ, because that really does conclude our webinar. And thanks very much for listening. And thank you for your patience.
My hat back on. Right. Well, thank you very much for an excellent, very interesting and entertaining talk. Right. Do we have any questions from the audience tonight? Excellent talk, says Tony. Yep. Does anyone want to ask Nick and Andy anything? Because that really was a fascinating talk. Though we are running late, so I understand if people want to get moving.
I mean, we got to sleep.
We always say that we're good for insomniacs.
Yeah.
No, I really enjoyed it. I loved the string. I did love the string work. That was fantastic. And was that an Uncle Boot that kind of leapt